How will global trade be altered by COVID-19? How do you see the changes coming, and what kind of effect do you see it having in the long term?
Well, I suppose in the short term, what people will be looking at is how we can lift the restrictions that have been imposed because of this COVID pandemic. Understandably, in the beginning, there was a lot of crisis management, and the temptation is always there to put up barriers and to put down restrictions and deal with the immediate. So we have to remove all of those restrictions and return to an open rules-based approach. And at the same time, I'm sure every country will be looking at how they can look at their vulnerabilities in the context of this health pandemic and look at how they are vulnerable at this particular time in terms of medicines, pharmaceuticals, medical supplies. And they will want to, I suppose, reshore some of this material and do more local production. And this is what will be happening, I'm sure, all over the world. And this is why we need, some rethink in terms of what we should do in terms of working together. And I've been reaching out to the United States. I've been reaching out through the WTO members in the last few weeks to see how we work together to have a more speedier recovery than perhaps if we were working individually.
Okay, let's just pick up on that. So you've been talking to, I would have thought, Ambassador Lighthizer over in the United States. Commissioner, one of your key jobs before the arrival of COVID-19 was to try and put the 2018 trade truce that Jean-Claude Juncker negotiated kind of back on track. What is the tone of the conversation that you are having with Washington right now? Is it amiable to making that happen, to putting the EU and the US back on a level kind of playing field or a more even playing field? What kind of feedback are you getting back from Washington?
Well, clearly over the last few weeks, people have been concentrating on trying to deal with saving people's lives, both in the European Union and indeed in the United States. So there has been a little bit of a lacuna in recent weeks, but we're expecting in the next few weeks to get back on track. The mandate that we have in the European Union is to negotiate with the American administration based on the 2018 mandate, and that still exists. We have been making some progress in the earlier part of 2020, and I'm looking forward to re-engaging with Ambassador Lighthizer and his team in order to make more progress, hopefully in the coming weeks.
And you had visited DC several times, Commissioner Hogan, during that time. One of the sticking points at the time was agriculture. The US wanted the EU to put agriculture on the table. That was firmly off limits. Post-pandemic, is it now on the table potentially?
No, we continue with the mandate of July 2018, and I think both the United States and the European Union are happy to do so. We have made some progress on the industrial tariffs, on sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Trade and technology and energy issues are on the table. Standards and conformity assessment in respect of industrial products of the future with the Commerce Secretary. So there's a big agenda without agriculture on the table, and I think there's an open-minded spirit to try and make some agreement here, and I hope that the positive attitude of the European Union will continue to find good engagement in the United States. And I'm very happy with the constructive engagement we had, in the early months of this year. I have invested a lot in trying to refresh the relationship with the United States, and Ambassador Lighthizer and I are certainly having a constructive relationship at the moment.
You did talk about vulnerabilities in supply chains, countries potentially looking inwards. How can you do both? How can you have a less globalized global economy and at the same time cooperate with the United States and with various European countries to have a speedier recovery?
Well, I suppose Europe is looking at what we call strategic autonomy. We want an open rules-based approach, fair competition and fair rules that can be implemented by a reformed World Trade Organization. We are doing a lot of deals around the world in free trade agreements. We have a lot of partners, 75 countries, and we want to do more of them. And at the same time, there are vulnerable sectors that we've seen exposed during this pandemic, particularly in the health area. And equally the production of medical supplies that are important and essential for our citizens. I think both the European Union and the United States see this issue now very coldly, that you cannot depend on just one geographical location in the world, and we have to diversify. And we are going to do that, so is the United States, but that doesn't mean that we cannot do both. We can deal with the vulnerable sectors where we're dependent in the context of a pandemic and a crisis, but equally we have to have, and balanced with that, we have to have an open rules-based approach for the entire economy.
Does steel fit into that bailiwick, Commissioner. You have been put under pressure by European steel producers to maybe look at cutting quotas on what can be imported tariff-free into the European Union. This is kind of a legacy of the steel tariffs that were put on by Washington vis-a-vis China, and the EU was concerned that some of that extra steel could end up within the EU. But you're now being put under pressure by EU steel manufacturers to make sure actually that steel quotas are cut. Do you see that happening? Are you amenable to that idea?
Well, we put a safeguard mechanism in place for steel and aluminium 2 years ago. This is now up for review, and I expect to make a decision by the end of June about what changes we're going to make on this safeguard mechanism. We have to take account of the fact that there's a lot of product that has been produced that is looking for a home post-pandemic and in the context of the economic recovery. I'm sure that there are various countries in the world that are looking at going in at a low cost in order to remove the surplus product that they have in the steel area. So we're conscious of this in the context of the decisions that I will make at the end of June. But the safeguard mechanisms have worked reasonably well up to the time of the pandemic outbreak. And we, again, as I say, we're not going to delay making a decision on what we need to do to rebalance things in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I will be making a decision before the 1st of July.
Commissioner, one of the other decisions that you've got to make relates to the WTO disagreements between Airbus and Boeing. The United States has already imposed tariffs as a result of the kind of Boeing side of the ruling. We're about to get the Airbus side of the ruling. But a lot has changed over the last few months as a result of COVID-19. I guess my question is a straight one. Are you in a position, given the economic background at the moment, to impose extra tariffs on the United States as a result of what the WTO is likely to rule? Will you do that? Do you have the courage to do that, given the economic background?
Well, my courage is based around the fact that I don't agree with tariffs. I think we should reduce costs, reduce and eliminate tariffs where possible in order to ensure that we have our economies recovering as quickly as possible. And that's what I would like the United States and the European Union to do. We need to negotiate a settlement as well on Airbus and Boeing in order to remove this dispute from the agenda, because it's going on for 15 years. We need to give certainty to the airline sector at a time when they're in great crisis financially. So anything that prolongs this particular dispute is only prolonging the problems of the airline sector. So I think that we have a different solution than perhaps the one that you've outlined, which is to eliminate our tariffs, to make our economies competitive again, and to ensure that our economies recover more quickly.
Can you really be in a position to eliminate tariffs given the economic backdrop post the pandemic, though, Commissioner?
Well, certainly I feel that the United States and the European Union, if we work closely together, can look at sectors where we can actually reduce tariffs significantly. And we could start with the health area. The public are very concerned, of course, about the cost of medical supplies, equipment and pharmaceuticals. And this is an area we could start with. And this is what I would certainly advocate, that like-minded members in the WTO would work with the European Union in order to acknowledge the vulnerability that we've just experienced in relation to health-related products and to reduce the costs. We have reduced our tariffs and eliminated our tariffs and VAT on medical supplies on a temporary basis. This can become more permanent if we actually work together.
Do you anticipate having problems with China? So the US today announced that it was going to give an extension for some of these tariff exclusions for another 12 months. What about Europe? I mean, it's a very different situation now post-pandemic, which we're not even at yet, than it was a few months ago when trade was all anybody had to focus on, and the game theory of it all was, well, I can outlast you. Now the mathematics and the game theory is very different.
Well, there was a lot of excitement in the United States when they signed a Phase 1 agreement with China that it was going to be a game changer. In January this year, this was being celebrated while I was in the United States. And unfortunately for this deal, it seems, that the pandemic is going to make a big difference in terms of its implementation. But at the same time, when I was in the United States in January, the United States, the European Union and Japan signed a very important statement on how we were going to tackle foreign subsidies and the impact that they were having in terms of economic competition and the way it was affecting our companies in relation to competing in a fair way. We are now working together in order to advance this particular statement to like-minded countries and to deepen the cooperation in terms of how we can deal with these issues of state-owned enterprises being subsidised and competing unfairly. European Union has an ongoing negotiation at the moment in terms of an investment agreement as well with China. And these are the issues of forced technology transfer, subsidisation of their state-owned companies to compete unfairly, and generally the imposition of industrial subsidies across the board in so many areas of economic activity in China is of great concern to the European Union, and we would love to work with the United States in a more close cooperative way in order to deal with these issues, and we stand ready to do so.
Commissioner, you have talked about an end of 2020 target for achieving that accord with China, that trade accord with China. Is that still realistic, given what you have just said?
Well, the big issues that I've mentioned that are very well known to the United States and the European Union, like the industrial subsidies and the SOEs, and technology generally, these issues are not resolved yet in our negotiations. Neither were they resolved in the Phase 1 negotiations by the United States. So they're very much on the table, and I suppose they are going to be the critical issues that will have to be discussed, and hopefully we can reach an accommodation with China on these issues in the intensive round of negotiations in the coming months. But we are engaged, we are making progress with China, and I hope that we will reach a deal at the end of the year, but it will be substance over speed. It will be based on dealing with these issues that I've just outlined in a very firm way.